13 Questions by Mantranscending. Manhood in the Digital Age.
This week on 13 Questions, we're going to be chatting with Walter Bosley. Great guy, great chat, great answers. Graham will give you the bio here in a little bit. But Walter had a great chat, great extension, great little bonus extension. Again, one of our earlier interviews, this one's a little older, but we're starting to catch up with the 2 interviews a week. We're starting to streamline the questions and get them where we want them. We added a couple bonus questions. I think Walter is when we've got the 7 or 8 bonus questions as opposed to the 5 we had in the beginning. So yeah, great answers from Walter. He's got an interesting background. Of course, we met him through our other podcast, the Grimerica Show, and interviewed him over there about secret space program and stuff like that. Walter's got an interesting extension, to say the least. Probably one of the more interesting ones to date. I mean, they've all been great. This will be episode number 15. So 15 extensions in the back catalog. If you go sign up today, 13questionspodcast.com, hit the sign up page, get that new, shiny, new premium RSS feed that's going to give you access to the entire back catalog in its entirety with the 15 to 45 minute extension on each episode. And including every episode going forward, two episodes a week, you're going to get that nice 30 or 15 to 45 minute extension. And that alone is worth the price of admission. The $777 a month, or the $77.77 a year, or the $777 lifetime. You know, I know a lot of shows that are charging more than that, and that's all you get is the extension. We give you that. We give you instant access to the courses. We've got licensed from TJ Walker right now. 5 different communications courses totaling over 100 hours of content, valued at a couple $100. You get instant access to all that immediately. And we're going to change those affiliates up from time to time. You get instant access to our private members-only Discord. You get instant access to the members-only forum. There's an option there. You can sign up on the members page to get emailed out weekly journaling prompts and stuff like that. There's going to be a bunch of bonus podcasts coming out over the next few months as we get more and more. We've got a couple people working on some open source podcasting, which is the other thing we give our members the ability to do as soon as you become a member. You can email myself or Graham or Adam or anyone on the team, and we'll help you along. And we're working on getting a page up, but for now, whatever you need, we'll help you so that you can go out. And if you want to go record your uncle or your grandpa or your brother or your boss, your friend, your buddy, yourself, get your buddy to interview you, whatever you want to do the questions, do the questions and the bonus questions, and send us the audio, and we'll release it into the feed. And somebody's story that you love will be immortalized online forever, and their wisdom will be passed down for who knows how long, at least until all the power shuts off, which hopefully won't be anytime soon. So Walter Bosley. Bosley?
Yeah, he's an investigator of historical occult mysteries, author of pulp fiction novels, and a screenwriter who's appeared on the History Channel's Ancient Aliens. And he's, like Darren was saying, he's got an interesting background. After 19 years in national security, he was a licensed private investigator in California, where he also runs a small press company, Lost Continent Library. He's traveled much of the world, both on and off the job, including trips in Mexico and South America with David Hatcher Childress, whose Wex magazine has published articles by Bosley. He was born in San Diego, California, and attended SDSU, where he earned a BA in journalism. He's been employed by the FBI, is an inactive reserve officer in the Air Force, which he served as a special agent of the AFOSI while on active duty, and then worked as counterterrorism operational consultant for 6 years following that military service. He spends his time writing fiction and nonfiction, as well as investigating strange mysteries in between PI assignments. And you can get some of his work at empirethewheel.blogspot.com. He also talks quite a bit on other shows about the breakaway civilization and secret space program, and the UFO sort of mystery in terms of ancient airships, not ancient, but airships from the 1800s and the secret organizations that could have been operating stuff before the Wright brothers
Nemza or
started
whatever
flying.
it was, yeah.
Nemza and-
Yeah, it's interesting. Nimza, that's what it was. Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, head over to grimerica.ca if you guys want to look into that kind of stuff. Those interviews with Walter.
Super interesting.
Yeah, super cool stuff. And he's definitely not really talking about that kind of stuff here. Just answering our 13 questions. And he's doing a great job at it. So enjoy, and do think about heading over to the website and becoming a member today.
Welcome back to 13 Questions. My name is Adam. We are speaking with Walter Bosley. Walter is a private investigator, former counterterrorism consultant, author and screenwriter who runs Lost Continent Library, a book publishing company. He also hosts the Walter Bosley channel on YouTube. And, well, he's joining us on 13 Questions. Walter, you've had a chance to review the questions, so we'll jump right in.
Okay.
What was the best advice ever given to you?
There's certainly not just one thing that you can say in a sentence as far as advice goes. I find that advice is subjective to what, you're being advised about. It can be professional advice, personal advice, and they can all be equally valid, though, in different areas of your life. But some things swim over into others. I was told by my mentor before I went into my career in national security, a couple of things that stayed with me. One was to always maintain a sense of humor. And the other one was to never let everyone, never let everyone know how much you know or how smart you actually are. Now, I know some people would say, well, that's not very good advice, in the workplace, because you want to perform best, you want to put your best foot forward. But he wasn't talking about that. Of course, I was expected to perform, as best I could, with my abilities and do the best I could on the job. But it was more, kind of a when you get into that background, that personality, human social interaction aspect of the workplace, where you have to apply these kinds of rules. And I found that that served me well in my particular profession, because when you're an investigator, when you're somebody who's digging into things, when you're an intelligence collector, you're always better coming from the position if they think you're that rumpled, kind of half dumb Columbo type of guy, because, them underestimating you is always better for you.
Yeah, you don't want somebody on their guard.
Yeah, exactly. You want them to think that, you're just not slick enough to catch them, to figure out, or, to know what's really going on. And then in those unfortunate cases where sometimes you have to make a maneuver, the element of surprise is always in your favor. And one way you can create that element of surprise for yourself is if they think that they're smarter than you. And of course, it's always very satisfying when you do experience those moments when the other guy realizes that he's not, because, the devastation of an enemy or an opponent can be one of the most satisfying things in life. It truly can be. And, that's kind of in the mix there. That's just, I hope I don't say 1,000 times today. The other piece of advice about maintaining a sense of humor, I found that to be very valuable as well. Not just obviously because I was in a job that could have its moments of risk and danger, and it's a great stress reducer to maintain the sense of humor, but it's great for your sanity too. It helps you in those moments, not just of danger, but in the moments of frustration, when you feel like things are just not going your way at all and there's nothing you can do about it. just to keep that stress level down and your own sanity, it's just best to just keep that sense of humor about it. When I was in Iraq, for example, on my job in my counterterrorism days, one of my two best friends on that job, he was my team leader, thank God. And it just made it so much more enjoyable as a war zone in Iraq could be. And he and I had known each other for a few years by then, and we have the same sense of humor, the same tastes in the arts and entertainment and stuff like that. And we were working with a third guy who went back to the office and complained that he was never going to work with us again. And they thought, oh my gosh, what did these guys do to him? And his complaint was that we, when we're going around doing our job, we're quoting movies and Bugs Bunny cartoons and just laughing it up and having a good time. And, he felt we should be a little more serious and grim, since we're in Iraq and a place like that. And our bosses, I was told, just got a big kick out of that because they realized, okay, we know that, Walter and Eric can handle the stress out there. And, that was true. We're in a place like that. And that's the way he and I always worked when we worked there or Afghanistan. We learned how to balance out the seriousness of the work and the environment with keeping that sense of humor mixed in there. It can be a dark, twisted, and grim sense of humor, but sometimes that's the most fun, type of humor. And I contrast this against. I remember the day we were at the. It was the base they made at the old Baghdad airport, and we were co-located with a lot of military guys, and it crossed my mind. There they were, sitting in the rec room. This is their downtime when they're supposed to be relaxing, and there they are watching the movie Black Hawk Down. Now, if you've seen Black Hawk Down, you remember it. That's kind of a tragic, sad film, And I remember thinking, I don't want to sit here and watch this. We're in this war zone. We're all supposed to be doing our jobs, and here's this movie playing where it just shows, our own guys being slaughtered and wiped out, and it just, ugh. And I thought, you know what? This does not match my philosophy of stress management. Balancing out the energies of where you're at, what's going on. So I remember I left the rec room, and my buddy and I, we went into another area and we watched Austin Powers Goldmember.
Nice.
And we were just laughing our asses off. I had seen that film before, but it was never funnier ever than that day we were just sitting there in Iraq having some downtime, watching it then. So, And those two pieces of advice, maintain a sense of humor and never let anybody know how smart you really are and everything that you actually know. I've actually applied that across the board in life, and I still do.
What was the most important lesson you learned from your parents?
I would have to say, oh gosh, because you learn so many, or you should. It all comes down to integrity, I think. Don't lie, be trustworthy, be honest. I have to tell you, a lot of these kinds of questions, actually, it's interesting how what I learned in the Boy Scouts also is a good thing to point to, because you have, the whole trustworthy, honest, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent, all that, on my honor, I will do my best. It's interesting how, if you've ever been in the Scouts and you remember those things, the oath and the laws, that if you go back and you look at that, you go, well, this is the stuff, of course, that your parents teach you, at least mine did. And then it was reinforced through being in this organization, the Scouts. And gosh, if you think about that once a day and just apply those, you're going to maintain your integrity. And going back to, the question that, from my parents, the earliest thing you learn, the earliest things you learn are going to be from your parents. And I'd say that was the biggest thing I learned, have integrity, show up, in your job on time, do your best. And really it always comes down to being honest and having that integrity. So I'd have to say that's really, if I had to pick one thing, that's it.
What book has been the most influential on your life and why?
The Odyssey of Homer. The Odyssey, and kind of along with it, of course, the Iliad, but the Odyssey, definitely. My mentor turned me on to it. And he did. Now, of course, I was familiar with the Odyssey growing up because of through movies and school and stuff, but I never read it until my mentor turned me on to it. And he not only told me to read the book, he gave me a particular way how to read the book, which was very interesting. And what I discovered was that the Odyssey presents kind of a representative structure of the everyman's life, or at least, I could relate to it. And ever since reading it and understanding it, as I've gone through my life, I can relate experiences and incidents to things in that book, whether it's relationships, whether it's stuff to do with the job, whether it's intellectual pursuits, whether, no matter what it is, I can always look to the Odyssey and go, oh, wow, okay, well, this is where Odysseus dealt with this, and that this is where Odysseus dealt with that. And it's definitely the Odyssey. And what's interesting is I say by extension now, but it actually was my favorite book before I was introduced to the Odyssey, and that's the Count of Monte Cristo. And the themes that these two books share, of course, are the primarily the vengeance story. In the Odyssey, he's away at war, thanks to the egotist Agamemnon and in Menelaus. So he's forced to be away because of war and his trials and travails just trying to get home from war, where the Count of Monte Cristo, as we know, was condemned to, wrongfully condemned to an island prison and, makes his way back. But it's a revenge story. And, but really, it's the Odyssey. It's definitely the Odyssey.
What do you think about what it is about that story that makes it transcend time?
I think because of what I said, early on, is that it is an allegory for each man's life, the stages of your life, the phases of your life, your experiences. For example, look at what Odysseus experiences on the way home with his adventures with the various female characters. Okay, yes, he has this faithful wife at home who's dealing with these, jerk suitors, and but he also, as he's coming home, he gets involved with, or he encounters Circe, the beautiful woman who turns men into pigs. Okay, and we see how he's given advice at one point in the story on how to deal with her, by drawing his sword early and keeping it at her throat so that she realizes he can deal with her pretty harshly at a given, in an instant. But then there's Calypso, who completely seduces him, with her magic, so to speak. And even though he's seduced and charmed by her, he's still very sad, and he longs for home, that kind of thing. And then there's, towards the end, shortly before he gets home, there's young Nausicaa, the girl, who by this time he realizes, okay, my adventures with women have gotten me into more trouble than I should have let them. So I'm not gonna pursue this one with this young girl here. I'm gonna say thank you, no thank you, and and get myself home. Now, those three particular characters can represent different relationships that a guy can have, in his life. You get to a certain age, you've all experienced the Cersei, the woman who's really Cersei's a ball buster in our modern parlance, turns men into pigs, right? She's beautiful. Men throw themselves at her feet, and she's just a ball buster, and yet they still clamor. Odysseus is given the advice on how to deal with a ball buster. And then there's Calypso, the beautiful woman who's extremely charming, and yet there's just something not quite right in the situation. And then, of course, the young girl when it's you're older, and each of us can face those situations, and we'll each deal with it differently. I have encountered the ball buster, and I learned what the allegorical sword drawing means. It means just being strong and firm, and not taking it. And I have had the Calypso in my life, the beautiful, charming, enchanting, amazing, and yet there's something just slightly off. There's just something that ultimately it's not really the right place to be. And I handled that one, I think, the way Odysseus, he goes through a lot of moaning and whining and stuff, before he finally gets away from Calypso when they come to her and say, let him go. Gosh, this poor bastard. And then the Nausicaa. Now, I flubbed the Nausicaa one because instead of walking away from that, I got into a relationship that, didn't end successfully. But, I think each one of us in our lifetime, you get to a certain point, you read the Odyssey, you're going to be able to equate things that Odysseus goes through with things in your own life. I've certainly experienced that.
What daily habits or rituals do you have?
Well, I wake up later than most people, and I usually don't interact socially, publicly, or whatever for usually at least 3 or 4 hours. You guys got me early in my day. That's why if I seem kind of a little disconnected in my answers here, it's because I'm not, fully awake. Because it's my wake up process that I give myself kind of a long wake up process, and then once it just kicks in. Once I feel like, oh, okay, I'm awake. I usually like to get some work done when it's quiet around the house. And, I'll get back to the work later in the evening. Ritual-wise, that's really the closest of what I'd call a ritual. I mean, seriously, I take it to that degree. My that wake up phase I'm talking about. That is kind of my ritual. I get a cup of coffee. I sit down in the one particular place, and I catch up on messages. I kind of just let my mind get back into the real world. That's really about as close to
Nice.
A ritual that I can think of.
If I were to ask your best friend, what is the one thing they would say you need to work on the most, and why?
Well, that's interesting, because even a best friend might tell you that they don't really know me to the degree that you would think most best friends know each other. My nature is, by nature, I'm an introvert. I'm a very internal person. By nature, as a kid, I was very shy. And I think that's still part of my nature. Now, I don't project a dishonest personality. What I project is a facet of my real self for the particular task at hand. Okay. But a facet is not the whole thing, So even friends, get to know facets. I'm somebody who I've been this way since I was a kid. I don't like to burden others with a problem I might have. I really hate to be, an emotional or psychological burden on others. That's why I'm usually very reluctant to ask for assistance on anything. Because I also value, self-reliance as much as possible. I mean, none of us are 100% self-reliant. Of course, that would be foolish to think we are. But because of my introversion, because I don't really like to burden others, even my best friends, for the most part, have only seen me at my best. So if I had to answer that and say, what would they say that I should change? It would be probably maybe that. Mm-hmm. They'd like to see more facets. They would like me to not worry about being a burden, or maybe they'd like to see me more. For the last several years, particularly doing all these books, I've been somewhat of a hermit, putting air quotation marks around that. So they would probably like to hear from me more. Yeah, that's what I would say. That's it. They'd probably like to see me be a little bit more interactive than I have been, because I can disappear. I can withdraw. I mean, that's why I was good at working around the world and being away from home for a month at a time, because I can completely withdraw and be off in my own zone for long periods of time. And yeah. I don't know how to answer that exactly.
No, that honestly, that's the most introspective answer I've heard yet. So what are you most curious about?
The unknown. Frankly, the unknown. That's what fascinates me. I love travel because I absolutely love and thrive on and crave seeing places I have never been to before. I really have become quite a John D. Van Helsing. I wouldn't say Dr. Frankenstein, but maybe a touch of, I've become that kind of guy, as particularly since getting into middle age. The unknown finally in my 40s became much more. It finally won out over women. When you're a younger guy, of course, you're still, women are just as much a big mystery as anything else, and I mean that in a good way, but by the time I got into my 40s, 2 marriages, 2 living girlfriends, and a fifth, it's like 5 significant relationships, and none of them work out. You learn some things from that, not just in general, but about yourself and such. And one thing I learned was, when it comes to relationships, I have never chosen wisely. And I don't mean that that's a slam on the others I've been in relationships with. When you don't choose wisely, the other person could be a wonderful person. It's just, it's just not the right situation, or it's not the right time. And that's what I mean by that, by not choosing wisely. I never, or I just chose on the wrong criteria.
And it probably goes both ways, incompatibility and both accepting it.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of thing. It's like, oops, gosh darn it, tried to make something work that just was doomed from the start, or, the stars weren't into it. So and I'm just saying all this to lead to, I finally got to a point in my life where I realized, wow, what really pushes my buttons, what really fascinates me most in life is this desire to know these things, to explore the unknown, and that's why, restate the question again.
Oh, it was just what you were most curious about.
What am I most curious about? Yeah, because I wanted
the
to
unknown.
use that in my kind of closing answer is that, yeah, it really, the thing of all aspects of human life, of all aspects of reality, of all aspects of anything you can come up with, be it, whatever aspect of human life, I am most curious about the unknown. It's much more fascinating than human relationships to me. It's much more fascinating than material pursuits, which, don't get me wrong, I am absolutely not against material pursuits. There is nothing wrong with making some money and making yourself comfortable in that respect. Honestly, it can make life and the pursuit of the unknown much easier. But yeah, truthfully, it's the unknown.
What was the most embarrassing experience of your life?
Well, going back to what I said about being an introvert and being shy and only showing certain aspects of myself, I've kind of actually avoided devastatingly embarrassing moments. So that's the plus side. But I will give you one example of an embarrassing moment. When I was an OSI agent, I had to brief in an exercise. We had a field exercise, so we're all in our BDUs and playing soldier for that day. And the scenario was a deploying unit had to be briefed, so I had to stand in front of this unit, all these guys, to give the briefing. And somebody had screwed with, thinking it was funny, somebody had screwed with the strap on my weapon, on my rifle. And as I was starting in my talk, I turned and the strap came undone and the weapon clattered to the floor. Now, it was exercise, so of course the thing wasn't loaded. But that was really embarrassing and humiliating because, weapon handling issues. I mean, you just, that says it all right there. And it was because somebody had messed with my strap and they had done it on purpose. They had really loosened it as I was standing there waiting and holding it. It was, they managed to get to it while I was distracted. And it only took a couple of minutes of it rubbing on my shoulder, and it did what they had hoped it would. And the lesson I learned from that? After that was when I started doing that thing that a lot of guys do, where you take the duct tape and you tape the ends of your straps, and so that they will never come undone. But that's that.
What is your greatest fear? How did you overcome it?
I don't know if you ever overcome your greatest fear. You just learn to deal with it. Now, you can point to different fears, and one of them is I'm not crazy about heights. Okay. For instance, there's no way in hell I want to skydive for any reason. So, of course, I choose to just not do it on the fun, side of life. I'm just not going to do that for recreation. And, but when I'm on airplanes, because I'm not crazy about heights, I never went on an airplane flight in my life until 1988. I was in my early 20s. And it was my first experience. I was with the FBI. And it was just kind of a white knuckler for me because I had never been on an airplane in my life. And flying always made me nervous for those first few years. For about 8 years, I just hated flying. And then when I first got to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, by the time I was with the Air Force, I had to, in the first week I was there, I had to do a tour of my AOR. So I had to fly over to St. Louis because I had to go to Whiteman Air Force Base and a couple other places. And that day it just clicked. For some reason I was relaxed, I was calm, and I enjoyed flying after that. But I don't like small aircraft. Small aircraft make me nervous. So I avoid them. But if I have to get on them, like for a job or something, what I do is I just remind myself, you know what? The pilot's the professional, the trained professional. While I'm on this airplane and he's flying it, there's absolutely nothing I can do if something goes wrong. Nothing I can do. So I'm not going to give myself an ulcer thinking about that. And I just make myself let it go. So to answer the question, I would say that for me, never really getting over fears, I just handle them as I'm faced with them. Now, on the weird, sinister side of life, my biggest fear are demons. And, maybe dealing with one of them. It just, that idea just bothers the hell out of me. So when I think about it, so I don't think about it. How do I deal with it? I just choose to
it's a hard one too.
I choose to avoid dabbling in or dealing in things that will, readily expose me to such entities. But yeah, the film The Exorcist, I've never in my life been able to watch the whole thing. I'm in that generation where that film was just too realistic a depiction of that particular subject. And, things about that film just bother me too much. It way bother me too much. So how I deal with that is I choose not to watch it. But I recognize it's a masterpiece of horror cinema.
Well, again, back to, don't give yourself an ulcer for no reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Who were and or are your role models and why?
Chronologically in life, it starts with I could say my dad, because, he was the strong father, always working. My dad was a really confident guy. He projected confidence, and he could do stuff that I to this day can't do. I mean, but remember, he was in that generation where, in school, the math they learned was more advanced than, what I learned.
And practical.
He had wood shop, metal shop. I grew up watching this guy, watching my dad. If he wanted, the big lawn with the sprinkler system and certain landscaping, he did all this himself, from sitting down and doing the drawing, the mechanical drawing and layout stuff himself. Okay. Then going to the hardware store and getting all the stuff he needed, and, laying the sprinkler, digging everything that you can imagine. He was in that generation that could do all that stuff themselves, building the fences, everything. He was the best natural athlete I ever knew personally. The man could master anything. This goes back to confidence, and that was what, and yet at the same time, he never gave me a hard time if I wasn't as good at sports or anything. Never, ever. I mean, it was great. My dad was not an asshole. So I would say that because of an example of confidence, okay, believing in yourself and following through, my dad, then my uncle, who was my mentor that I'm talking about, he's the one that really, he's the one that the things he taught me and demonstrated to me and represented to me are what made me develop into what made me good at my job, and what gave me, my dad taught me the value of the confidence. My uncle taught me how to draw it out and apply it and live it. And, he himself was probably the toughest, just guy that I ever knew in my life. I mean, I would not have, me in my 30s would not have, you've heard this before from guys, but he was one of those guys that me in my 30s, I would not have taken him on, in his 70s. Okay. He could have kicked my ass all over the place. I'm confident, and he was brutally honest, he was just that for me at the right time in my life. He was that example of, the true mentor that comes in and helps you finish your development as an adult, as a professional, as a guy, the man thing. And so, it was my uncle. There's always historical figures that we admire. John Paul Jones is I'm an Air Force guy, he's a Navy guy, but John Paul Jones I have great admiration for. Of course, I've written about some of these people. Sir Richard Francis Burton. I mean, he seriously, is a role model. As far as advice goes, I know somewhere in there, we already answered it, or you're going to ask a question about advice. But since we're on Burton now, one of the best things I've ever read in the way of advice for men, Richard Francis Burton said this. He basically said, guys, if you're at a decision point in your life, you got to make a really important decision. Consult the women. And then do the opposite of what they tell you. And now I know some ladies might take that the wrong way, but within the context of what Burton meant, I have personally learned that I get what he's saying. I'll put it that way. I'll get what he's saying. It's and the reason he's saying that is he was a guy who would consider all options, all possibilities, all perspectives. See, he was a guy very much who understood psyches, right? Okay, the female psyche considers the other side of things that we don't naturally consider, right? Which have to be considered if you want the fully rounded footing to go into a decision. So when he says consult the ladies and then do the opposite, he's not necessarily slamming the ladies. What he's reminding you is, now look, listen to what they're saying, take it into account. But remember, you are a man, and that's not the foundation upon which that particular psyche is not how you should make your action or decision. Okay. And I'm not really clarifying that well. There's a better way to put it, but I found that to be great advice. Now, there is an element of that where we're going to go Star Trek here for a second. Okay. What he's also saying is the female psyche very often leads with the emotions. Okay. And sometimes just a cold, logical decision simply needs to be made and an action be taken. And the emotion-driven decision can be devastating for a man, where it's not for a woman. Okay? And what do I mean by Star Trek? Well, look at the three main characters of the original series: Kirk, Spock, and Bones. Okay? This is not new with me. You've heard this 1,000 times, but it's always good to revisit it. Bones is the emotional one. Okay, Bones represents really the feminine psyche, the emotion first. Okay, the feelings first, leading with the feelings. Okay, Spock represents cold, hard logic. Okay, without any emotion whatsoever. And what is Kirk? Kirk is the blend of the two. Kirk, actually, you could almost argue that if let's get esoteric and purple here, you could almost argue, do either Spock and Bones actually exist? Do they really exist? Or is Kirk the one who actually exists, and the other two are just the two halves of his psyche? See? Or do they exist as the science officer and the medical officer, but are their personalities just in Kirk's mind? Because they're the two sides of his own psyche, and yet what Kirk does is what Burton is saying is you're dealing with two sides of the psyche, but then at some point you got to take action. Okay. And remember, Kirk is the balance of the two. When Spock's being way too logical, Kirk knows when to bring in, Bones's touch of emotion, right? And feelings. Whereas when Bones is, just going silly and, ape shit with the emotions, he knows when to bring the Spock part in and say, hey, relax, Bones. We're just, just be cool. We're going to make a logical decision here. And I think that's closer to what I was trying to say that Burton was advising, but it's a great piece of advice. It really is, because even superficially, I live in a household where, my mom and I have two sisters. I didn't have any brothers. Okay. And I have nieces, and the last several years I have been surrounded by a lot of female energy, and I'm a guy, and it gets to you sometimes. All the excess. When sometimes you just want to cut through the Gordian knot of that feminine psyche nonsense and just get to a damn point and move forward, keep moving forward and make progress. And so Burton's advice really comes in to play for me. And that's just one of the reasons why he's a role model for me. His wisdom that he had, and his guts, and what else? His hunger and thirst for knowledge of the unknown, the thirst for knowledge. So, Burton.
Nice.
And, yeah.
What institution of society or structural aspect of modern life would you change given the chance?
One last thing on the previous question. Sure. I apologize. Let me throw in Orson Welles in there. Because Orson Welles, a man with a vision who just, a genius, artistic genius, and in spite of all the odds against him, continued to strive to do his films and express himself in that way. And so Orson Welles is a third role model. Now, restate the next question again.
Sure. What institution of society or structural aspect of modern life would you change given the chance?
Our education system in the United States. Where things went wrong was when what is known as the Prussian method, interestingly enough, was applied about a century ago. And it increasingly, particularly from mid-20th century, just started going down the toilet as more social scientists got their hands on our education system. The worse road it went down. So really, instead of getting, for instance, I mentioned before, the level of math my dad, got in high school was higher than what I got in college. Same with my mom. Here's an interesting thing. My mom learned, she took accounting in high school. And when she graduated high school, she was qualified to go, work the books and the accounting books and stuff, in a job after that, just out of high school. Now, decades later, when she was getting a promotion at work, she had to take accounting courses. She hadn't been in school in 30 years, 30-something years. And she did very well in what was, by the mid-'80s, college level accounting. And the professor was really impressed. But he wasn't surprised because, she said, well, this is all stuff I had in high school. And that's kind of my point. It's just the first thing that started bothering me about the education system was when I was in college. And, don't get me wrong. I'm not a wet blanket. I don't like to rain on anyone's fun parade. But when we start shaving either, especially music programs or, some of the arts, to maintain the sports program, I began to see there's something wrong here. Okay. When, the sports program is just as important as, or more important than some of the other things in the classical education. And, it just got worse from there, where they stopped failing kids that should be failed and held back because, we don't want to hurt their feelings. And anyway, our education system is completely screwed up. And, the Bush administration made it far even worse with this Common Core stuff. It's just a big mess. And, what I would do is I know educators who know more about this than I do that are just as alarmed about it. I read an article recently where, the value of music courses can teach all sorts of amazing things, that can be applied in all other topics, be it mathematics or, arts and letters or whatever. And we just keep shaving away music. Teaching kids how to play pianos and other instruments. Fewer and fewer kids seem to be doing that. And and look at the condition of popular music now. It's at a nadir. It sucks. If you're speaking musically. So it really, I would say, and then the downside to the deplorable state of our education system in this country just messes up all other aspects of the person's life after they get out in many ways. It adversely affects them. So the education system needs to be seriously overhauled.
What is the most courageous thing you have ever done or seen in your life?
I don't know if I've done, but or seen. I don't know. Okay, that's a tough question, because in my world, in my field, things that other people would consider courageous, you consider that's your job. So you don't think of it in terms like that. Every once in a while, this is one of those questions where the answer to it will pop into my head like an hour after we're done. So let's go to the next one.
Sure. What rule do you have for yourself that you never break, and why do you think that it is important?
Oh, this is going to sound silly, but I mentioned earlier that I was in Scouts. The whole thing was Scouts honor. When you invoke your Boy Scouts honor, you give you raise your little hand with the three fingers there, and Scouts honor. I have never, and I will never break my Scouts honor. Why is that important? Because it goes back to your integrity. Your word has to have value. If you're going to be a free man, a free person, free man or woman, but I'm going to use the classical terms here. I'm not going to use the politically correct sensitive terms. So I use the term man. That doesn't mean ladies aren't included. When you're a free man, okay, in this world, one of the things that has to be valued is your word. Okay, that's part of being, a free person, is being able to be taken at your word and being able to give your word that you will either deliver on something, or that you did this or did not do that, that kind of thing. It all goes back to your integrity. So I see, when I invoke that Scout's honor, that's me saying, this is sacred to me. When I feel like that I need to invoke that, what I'm trying to impress upon somebody is, hey, it's not that I'm lying when I'm not using it. Don't get me wrong, because that's not the case either. But when it gets to the point where I feel like, hey, I'm invoking this, what I'm telling you is, no joking. I'm serious here. This is an integrity issue.
All right. You ready for the last of the first 13 questions here?
Have we gone through 13 already?
We have.
Wow.
This is 13. Yeah, it flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, are my answers okay? Am I sounding like an idiot or an asshole?
Not at all. You're doing very well. No, not that there's any wrong questions, but I'm entertained, and I feel like I'm getting value from your answers. So that's what we're trying to do here. All right. What does it mean to be a man in today's world?
Oh. Oh, boy. Yeah, that one.
It's a big one
Okay,
today.
there's two ways to look at that question. There's what does it mean, as in how does society see you today? And then there's what does it mean to be, more in the active verb sense of that, meaning how to be one in our society. I think that we are, in a certain way, we're at a perilous juncture for men in our times, in our world, our society, in that it's a popular fad, social fad, to and has been for decades actually, to deprecate, degrade the male. This started back with sitcoms in the 50s, where you first 50s and 60s, where you first started seeing where, oh, dad's just a dopey goof, and mom and the kids are the smart ones. And then that evolved into what we started seeing in the 80s and 90s, where parents are complete fools and idiots, and kids are just little genius angels. Both of these perspectives are ridiculous and inaccurate, and they've been very harmful. So, we live in a time that, and now we're having conversations about toxic masculinity. I mean, this disturbs me because, all my life, good men knew how to treat people, how to treat women, for example, and how not to treat them. At no point were we toxic with our masculinity, and something in our testosterone clouded our judgment and made us do these wrong, awful things that are blamed on this notion of toxic masculinity. Okay. There's just things you don't do, and if you do them, you deserve to have your butt thrashed. You deserve or to go to jail, or worse. But now we live in these times where men having this judgment, knowing right and wrong, they want to say that. How am I trying to say this? They're wanting to take that judgment away from men, and when they do, it really I know what I want to say. I'm just stumbling on how to say it. It really puts men in shackles and in manacles, because it goes back to the integrity thing, right? If you're a free man walking this planet, your integrity, your word mean a lot. And your word is greatly a part of your judgment. Okay? All these factors go into this. And we live in a time right now when we are told to just accept being told that we don't have wisdom, we don't have judgment, and it's inherently in the fact that we're male, that we're born male, which, the major implication, and it very often isn't even implied, it's just stated, is this imaginary fantasy and utterly ridiculous notion that the female is superior, particularly by virtue of her gender, her sex. This is not only ridiculous, it's ignorant, it's stupid, it's dangerous to any civilization. And it's just plain wrong. It's wrong philosophically, it's wrong morally, it's just wrong. But it is the popular order of the day. And, I'll hand it to most of the women I know agree with me when you talk with them. They're like, yeah, that stuff is just crazy and nutty. Why are we even having to endure it in the public conversation these days? But so what it means to be a man today is that you have to be on the defensive for just being what you are. And that's wrong. And there's going to be a backlash to that, some type of backlash to that, eventually. And I think it'll be a positive backlash where people will just start saying, oh, just knock that off. Just shut up. We're not hearing this crap anymore. But, hopefully it's not something that ends up being worse. So what does it mean then to be a man in the active, verb sense of that? Well, have integrity, have some backbone. Okay, learn to be Kirk. Don't be Bones. Don't be just Spock. Learn to be Kirk. And I've never subscribed to this. I can't stand these men who, when you don't know something, act like you do. Mm-hmm. No, one of the best things, the best men I've ever known, they admit when they don't know something. Okay, if you don't know how to do something, say, I don't know how to do that, but you know what? I can learn. See, that's what you do to be a man, is you admit what you can't do, but you also demonstrate a willingness to learn how to do that. Okay. Also, and this goes back to the integrity issue. If you disagree with the gang, with the group, with the mob, then resist doing what they want you to do. Stand alone if you have to. That's the other thing. Learn the virtue of solitude, the virtue of being an individual. In fact, that's really the greatest thing that any human being, male, female, child, adult, whatever, is your individuality. And I think men have a unique opportunity because of our natures to demonstrate the virtue of the individual. Okay. And I like to, and on that, I like to throw in the example. I like pop culture examples because it gives something, easy for people to grasp, to get the concept. People say, well, hey, Walter, sometimes you got to pull together as a team and do something. You're right. And let me show you the two examples. Now, X-Men has never appealed to me. I don't know why. I don't like the characters. I don't like X-Men. Now, here's the difference between X-Men and the Avengers. The X-Men, what do? They're all brought together in one institutional setting. That's Dr. Xavier's Academy or whatever. Okay. They all wear the same uniform. Okay. It's just team, collective. But the Avengers, what are they? They are individual heroes who are most of the time off taking care of their own missions, saving people, doing their own individual thing that they have to do. And what do? They wear different costumes. Okay. They don't all look like each other. Okay. There's diversity there for those who, bow at the altar of diversity. There's diversity there in the Avengers that is not in the X-Men, I argue. But what do? When they have to come together, they get together for that time that they have to. They take care of business, and then they all congratulate each other, shake hands or whatever, and they go back to being individuals. See, so individuals can come together. And, I use the example of the Avengers are the individuals who know when it's time to come together. Okay. And as opposed to that whole meme and theme of the collective identity, which, there's the X-Men. And that's the example I'm trying to give is men have today the unique opportunity to demonstrate that value of the individual. And I think that they need to do it, more often, those who don't. And quite frankly, part of, how to be a man in today's world is, just be one. It has nothing to do with whether you can be sensitive to if you have a daughter as opposed to a son. It has nothing to do with like sexual preference or anything. Okay, you can, some of the manliest guys you'll ever meet happen to be gay men. Okay, that has nothing to do with it. We're talking about the essence of being male, of man, and that's not just a physical characteristic. It's a mindset, it's an attitude, it's a psyche all of its own, and it is every bit as valuable and important for civilization as anything that the female brings to the table. They're actually, if men and women will just relax and be men and women, things are pretty balanced. They are equal. They're just equal in their different aspects, equal in their different what they bring to the equation. It's like the Tao or Tao thing, the yin and the yang. Okay, that's a classic example. So I would say that the best advice for being a man is know your identity, know what you are and who you are, understand your role in the bigger picture, and allow yourself to be that. I think you'll find that by following those natural impulses like that you'll be pretty much successful.
I like
if any
it.
of that made sense.
Read the Odyssey and become an Avenger.
Exactly.
Well, Walter, I really enjoyed your answers. That's it for these first 13 questions. We will be coming back. But before then, we'd like to ask everybody to go to mantranscending.com. You can become a member, get access to the premium podcast, the feeds, course writing exercises, and of course, you get the rest of the bonus questions, which are coming up right here. Welcome back, Walter.
Hey.
Bonus question number 1. What quality do you most admire in a man?
Courage.
What quality do you most admire in a woman?
Two things. There is, and it's two things equally. Number one is
I don't want no Hawaii. I don't want no Hawaii. Yo, what? I don't want no Hawaii. I don't want no Hawaii. Yo, what? I don't want no Hawaii. I don't want no Hawaii. Yo, what? I don't want no Hawaii. I don't want no Hawaii. Yo, what? I don't want no Hawaii. I don't want no Hawaii. Yo, what? I don't want no Hawaii. I don't want no Hawaii. Yo, what?
Why is one man rich and another man poor? Why we ain't satisfied? Why we gotta have more? Why your suicide rates on the rest so high? Why I tell you the truth but you say don't lie? Why is being a good father at an all-time low? Why is it acceptable? Yo, why? I don't know. Why she blame him and he blame her? It's useless. Ask yourself this question. Why you making excuses? Why do parents gotta bury their kids? Why we text and drive, not caring how scary it is? Why it's so hard to forgive and leave the past behind? And if you did, then that's divine. Why don't you help your brother when you see him fall? Why do we act like God don't see it all? Why do we call them black, them white, them Asians and use labels? Now that's racism.
I don't want no Hawaii.
Why?
I don't want no Hawaii. Yo, why? I don't want no Hawaii.
Why?
I don't want no Hawaii. Yo, why? I don't want no Hawaii.
Why?
I don't want no Hawaii. Yo, why? I don't want no Hawaii.
Why?
I don't want no Hawaii. Yo,
Why is
why?
there innocent people locked up for life, while some people can't say nothing nice? Why do we always gotta question what all of it means? And why won't you follow your dreams? Tell me why. The night when you took don't we turn from all the hate? And why don't we learn from all mistakes? Why do I keep on wrecking these fat beats? And teachers don't make more than professional athletes. And why? And why? And why? And why? And why? And why?
I don't wanna Hawaii. I don't wanna Hawaii. No, why? I don't wanna Hawaii. I don't wanna Hawaii. No, why? I don't wanna Hawaii. I don't wanna Hawaii. No, why? I don't wanna Hawaii. I don't wanna Hawaii. No, why?
This should be considered entertainment and not therapy. We hope you benefit from our resources available at 13questionspodcast.com. Thank you for listening.